Good morning, friends. We're back. It's Veteran Idiot. I'm Art, and this is Scrappy. Those of you following along, this one is done. For now, anyways. Actually, it's not really done. So what we got to do today is I'm going to tell you or show you how much it actually took to get this car running, or how much it costs to do the GT40, everything, a B-cam, just so some of you have an idea for your projects, and since some of you were asking. But first, this morning I'm going to take it out and drive it around for about an hour or so, get some more brake in, and then we'll come back and I'll explain all that to you. She looks good. She's a little rough on the edges. She looks good. So we're back. Got a problem with me, dog? Okay, so I forgot how much fun it was to drive one of these cars. These cars are just great cruising cars, and I apologize if the wind is coming through this microphone. Spring wind is in full effect right now. But anyways, cruising this thing around really makes me miss my 91 GT, RIP. So here's where we're at with this. Need to adjust the clutch again a little bit more. I don't have the right preload set on the pressure plate, so I got to get it into the right area, but that's not the biggest concern. Right now, the only thing that I've come across is that it runs a little bit hot, like 217, 218 when you're sitting for a long period of time in traffic. It is 92 degrees today, so it's warmer now than it was when I set this all up, but I think I need to back it down a couple degrees in the timing, see if that helps with the overheating. It's just getting hot, that's all it is. But we'll back down the timing a little bit, see if the idle can maintain with a couple degrees off the timing, but that's it. This car runs great, and we're at the point now where we can change the oil, check the filter, and then start ripping on this thing. But the reason you guys all came, you wanted to know how much all of this costs. And so there's two circumstances here, in actually two avenues. For me and us building this car, we had issues from the beginning. And if you go back to the beginning of this series, this car was destroyed. It was beat to death. Everything was broken on it. Everything was worn out. So we're kind of a special circumstance in that. Well, I guess, let me take that back. Pretty much everything you find on Marketplace for these guys that are under 10 grand are going to be pretty beat up. And that's crazy to say, but that's just the way it is right now. So our circumstance and our build with this car. So we pulled this engine out, hoping we could just bolt some stuff to it or put a 351, different avenue. We're not going to talk about that. So going back to this engine, we started pulling it apart. I was having some issues with the engine to begin with, and so needed to pull out, needed to rebuild it. Wanted to convert it to GT40 anyways. So I bought an upper and lower intake plenum, we threw it on there, and that cost about 160 bucks. Got it from a guy off of Facebook Marketplace, worked perfectly, threw it on, did all right. There were still problems with the engine, but this wasn't sunk costs necessarily. So 160 bucks for an upper and lower Explorer GT40 intake plenum. Didn't reuse the throttle body from the Explorer, none of that stuff. So it still has a factory throttle body, factory mass airflow sensor, and then the factory Mustang injectors. And then later on found out that the injectors for the Explorer were from like a Mountaineer or something like that, and 17 pound didn't work for us. anyways. So I could reuse the factory injectors on this. I didn't have to change anything to bolt that manifold on. So $160 got us to that point. And then we pulled the engine out completely, took it apart. I was just still having issues with it, and found out that one of the cylinders was severely gouged and it needed built. Bored over, built, just not a good scenario. I didn't want to throw the money into taking it to a machine shop, boring it over, getting new pistons, so on and so forth. It seemed like something that I didn't want to really do for this budget style build. And so I went out and I looked for another block. Ended up finding an Explorer block, completely bare block, for $140. Now remember, my approach is going to be different than if you have something else that you wanted to do with it. So I kind of went the long way around with this, but you'll see. So $140 for the block. Put all of the rotating assembly from the original 5.0 in there. Ended up just having to pay for the bearings, and then I got a cam and a gasket kit and lifters, because the lifters were wasted in the other engine, push rods and roller rockers. So I had all of that. All of that costs about $1,000. So we've got the $160 for the upper and lower, and the $140 for the block, and then $1,000 for all the other things to make it a good GT40 roller. So I needed the heads. The heads was the next step. Wasn't going to reuse the E7 heads. Wanted something that we could end up putting on a 351. So going with the GT40 heads. Now we got a full GT40 engine. The Explorer complete engine. Found the heads for $450. They had dual rate springs and 7/16 studs on them. 7/16 didn't work for us. Had to get 3/8 studs. That was $70. So here we are. I've got basically an Explorer engine, but the path that we took was a little bit different, trying to keep what we could with it. So you can go and you can get an Explorer engine, 98, 2000, 96, anywhere in there. The different heads that you'll find along the way will be the differences between them. But they are roller engines for about $600. You can go online and find it for about $600. So if you're gonna go that route, $600, and then you would still have to get a cam, and you might as well rebuild it. You just might as well. So that $1,000 kind of carries over into that, because you want to do all those things. Cam that's in there, it's not what would you call an HO cam. So you'd be upgrading that and go with a B cam anyways, like we did with this. B cam was like $300 some odd. Okay, so that's the two different routes we went with those things. So for that, I'm not going to count the clutch. That's something that you're going to put in at your preference or whatever. But to get us to a GT40 in this car, we're now looking at 160, 140, it's 300, then 1,000, 1,300, 450 for the head, 1,750. And I'm not going to count the miscellaneous stuff, because we're just talking about getting the car to that point. And so about 1,750 plus or minus on that for odds and ends stuff, oil, so on and so forth. But that got us to upper lower intake plenum, heads, complete rebuild, and B cam and roller rockers, 1/6 roller rockers with push rods and running. So that's realistically, I would say that's more realistic than going and get the Explorer engine and just tossing it in and doing all the other stuff. So although you can go get that for $600, I feel like at the same point you're going to end up doing all the same stuff again. So there's two different options in that, where the upper and lower intake plenum I picked up for $160, and then the heads were $450, and the blocks are essentially the same. So paid about the same, I would say, to convert to GT40 in that way. So my mind is kind of bridging that gap in those directions. Some of you might not see it that way, but that's just how I'm justifying what it costs to do all this. In essence, that's what you're looking at. I would say realistically $1,700-ish to do everything you need to do to make a proper GT40 conversion with B cam and have it run. So So far, I couldn't tell you the performance benefits. I don't have any performance baselines. I don't have times. I don't have anything like that. The only thing that I have was from an old trashed engine with no compression in one cylinder and trashed injectors dumping fuel and trashed lifters, trashed push rods and rockers, 9 seconds, 0 to 60, spinning the tires. That's the only time that I have, the only baseline, other than seat of the pants. So with my 91 Mustang GT, I had the tubular GT40 upper and lower intake plenum and full-length BBK headers, and that was about it. I didn't do anything else other than electric fans. And at 18, 19 years old, that car was the fastest thing that I've ever been in. And it wasn't necessarily fast, it just had a lot of torque, so it felt fast. Plus these cars don't weigh anything. So that's really the only judgment I have to base off of where we're at now. But during this break-in, doing those rolling loads in fourth gear and stuff like that, the car feels really, really strong. You can definitely tell that there is an RPM range that it enjoys. I would say 3,500 up with this cam, these heads, it enjoys it. Lower than that, you definitely feel like you've lost some of that torque, but beyond that, it feels really strong. And I think for the money that you're putting in it, unless you can go out and you can find somebody selling some AFR heads or some trick flow heads or some aluminum heads, 185, 165, I don't know, whichever direction you want to go with that are better than these heads, then I think this was a legitimate budget build and something that somebody can do. It may take a little bit longer in some instances. If I hadn't really planned ahead to do this type of thing, we wouldn't have the cash to do it right away. So it would take time in some aspect to put all this together. At $1,750, a lot of people don't have $1,750 just laying around in their budget to throw at a car that they don't drive every single day. Especially nowadays with the way inflation is and everything else costing literally an arm and a leg. But that's another story. We won't go down that road. But again, I'd say realistically, you're looking at about $1,700 to do the heads, cam, roller rockers, rebuild the engine, put new lifters, push rods, all of that stuff, new gasket kit, go through it, do it right. I think that's what you're looking at. You can absolutely do it much cheaper with a $600 junkyard GT40 Explorer engine, and then just buy the cam for $300, $330, whichever. I can't remember exactly what it was, but so you're about $1,000 there, and it would run. I'm sure it would run great, but you're using the old lifters, you're using the old rockers, and you're using very weak springs on the cylinder head. So you would likely have to pay the difference in that. I got lucky with the heads that I got because they had the dual rate. So I'm not counting that cost in there. And I think that's why I come to the $750 being a very realistic cost for this entire build. So that's where we're at with it in our budget GT40. And let me know what you guys think and whether that is actually a realistic budget build or if there are other ways to do it much cheaper. Personally, and now we're going in a different direction, personally, I think you get a much better result with taking the factory engine and putting the B-cam in it, getting some GT40 heads. We're going down the cheap side again, getting a carb lower intake plenum and putting a carb on it. I'm just saying, because now you're not dealing with a computer, you're not dealing with any of that. You're reaching maximum potential for what those heads can flow and what your cam is giving it. You're not worried about coming up lean or having too small of a throttle body, too small of mass airflow, not enough an injector, not enough pump, so on and so forth. I think that's the cheapest route. Carburetors are expensive, yes, but I think that is the best, cheapest route if you want to get the maximum potential out of the car immediately. And I'm an old carb guy, so that's kind of what I'm going to lean on. But I think going down the rabbit hole of making and getting the maximum potential of this cam, this intake and computer costs a ton of money. And I've said this through this entire process. I think that buying the mass airflow, buying the throttle body, having to buy the spacer if you have a spacer still on there, having to buy injectors and then a chip for the computer or a Holley Terminator X to make up the difference. It's a really, really expensive way to get to the same direction to keep fuel injection. So that's my point of view. Let me know what you think and which directions that you would have gone with it. And let me know if my budget was crazy. But I think it was a good budget. And I think it was a good build, and I'm extremely happy with the way this turned out so far. But I think it's going to be a ripper, and I need to get it to the track, and I think that's going to be coming up pretty soon. Anyways, that's all I got for you guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for following. Make sure you hit that like. And if you haven't subscribed, which is 52% of y'all watching this, make sure you hit the subscribe button because I got many more stuff and episodes coming up with this guy and other projects. We got a 70 C10 back there that needs an entire frame lowered and cut. All kinds of good projects coming up, power tours, everything else like that. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and follow along with me. Thanks for watching again, and as always, have fun. That's a good little car.